The much-anticipated Life Insurance Corporation IPO opened today. The government is selling shares in the price band of 902 and 949 rupees apiece and hopes to mop up 21,000 crore rupees through this issue. My colleague Priyanshi is here with more.
That's right, Parmeshwar. It's India's biggest IPO, and it's the much-awaited IPO indeed. It is open for the general public today, and it's till now. If we get you the latest status, it's been subscribed over 14% till now. That's the latest information on the subscription status. Now let's also go across to giving you the details on LIC. What are the positives? What are the concerns for the company right now? Let's first start with the positives. LIC is India's largest and oldest life insurer. It is a household name, it's a brand name, it's been linked to Indian families for generations, and LIC's profits in fact are much higher than its peers. In the fiscal year 2021, LIC's new net profit stood at 29 billion rupees, while the profits of the peers of LIC were much lower. If we give you the data, SBI Life's profit stood at 14.6 billion, and next was HDFC, whose profits stood at 13.6 billion. So a significant gap between the profits of LIC and the profits of its next following peers. So that's definitely a positive. The profits and the big brand name and the big connection to Indian families. Moving on, LIC is also the 5th largest insurer globally. It's behind just one German company, 2 Chinese companies and 1 Italian company. So along with a national standing, LIC also has a major international standing. But there are also some concerns. It's not all good for LIC. There are some concerns that investors should keep in mind before they make their decision to invest in LIC. The insurer's market share is consistently falling. It was 75.5% in 2014, but it now stands at around 66.2% in 2021. So a fall of nearly 9% just over the last 7 years. So we can see LIC losing its market share to its market peers. Now, the second point is also that 96% of LIC's new business comes from its agents. And while we stress on a digital India and more companies are getting more customers through online and digital modes, this becomes an important point as LIC's business, the new business that LIC gets, only 0.48% share of that is from digital marketing. And as I said, they depend for close to 96% of their new business share on agents. Then another point of concern that's not just for LIC but for the market in general, the IPO coincides with an expected Fed rate hike. The US Fed is expected to raise interest rates by around 0.5% this week, and this is expected to hurt the markets, not just Indian markets but global markets drastically. So the LIC comes at a time when this expected interest rate is going to happen this week, and it also comes at a time when markets generally have been unstable ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. Markets, in fact, fell over 3% in April. If we combine the data for April, they were down over 3% in April compared to what they started with. So uncertainties on the market and the Fed interest rate hike expected. So that's going to make the markets a little risky right now. So that's why the LIC IPO timed with all of these conditions could be a point of concern to consider. So those were the pros and the positives weighed against the concerns to give you a holistic picture of LIC before our viewers consider investing in the insurer. It's the largest, it's the biggest IPO, and these are the top few points that should remain in mind. Let's also now go across to, we have a guest with us on LIC to give us more insights on the IPO, how it's performing, what can we make out of it. Deven Choksi, who's a market expert. Deven Choksi, right now we can see that markets have been unstable, and as I said, a Fed interest rate hike is expected. So does the market have an appetite for such a large IPO at this point, the largest IPO in fact?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show. Well, my understanding is that I think the market does have the appetite for quality papers, and LIC is definitely, I think, one among them, where I think you have a lot of prospects to talk about. The fifth largest insurance company of the world, 10th largest insurance company with asset holding that they are having. About 4% exposure of Indian capital markets, I think, equity that LIC is having under the year. They are their AUM is 39 lakh crore plus, I think, vis-a-vis the total AUM of all the mutual fund players in the industry. I think so they are the largest compared to all the mutuals when you sum it up across all mutual fund players. So these are some of the arguments, I think, in favor of LIC, which is basically suggesting that they have a huge size, I think, which is important, I think, which cannot be neglected by any investor of the world. The second most important aspect, the investors who invested as an anchor investor into the IPO, they include some of the sovereign funds, the wealth funds, the endowment funds, pension funds, insurance funds of the world, which is basically suggesting that I think there is an appetite for the insurance companies' investment, I think, by these large funds. Also, 71% of anchor book is filled by the Indian domestic mutual funds who are basically investing on behalf of the retail investors. That means the retail investors are interested in buying this particular IPO as well. Now, given that kind of a situation of cap table, we feel that I think the marquee investors who are basically buying 3.5% of government's offering in LIC at this point of time, it is just a beginning. At the same time, I think the valuation wise, if you look at LIC's IPO, it is 1.1 times, I think, embedded value as a price. Now, this is extremely important because the listed companies which are there in the markets, they're quoting anywhere between 2 times to 4 times as far as I think their embedded value to pricing is concerned. As against which LIC is practically available at half of that valuation, even compared to the 2 times I think valuation which is there in a couple of companies. So in my viewpoint, I think the downside in the stock is limited. Upside in the stock would be high, more because, as I explained, I think the larger the insurance company, better would be the prospects going forward for them. And one should not be forgetting one important aspect, that you are having 39 lakh crore worth of AUM. This 39 lakh crore worth of AUM holds the prospect of becoming 150 lakh crore worth of AUM in a span of around 12 to 13 years. Okay. So this is an extremely important point, I think, which one should not be missing out. The company as a whole is changing the model, I think, under the new IRDA guideline, wherein they are going to be offering more non-par policies, which means that the liability side of the insurance company will come down, and on the same time, I think the profit for shareholders will increase. So these are all some of the arguments which are suggesting that LIC IPO could be a favorable investment opportunity for the investors in general.
Right. So you also stressed upon the valuation point, which is an important point of concern. Let's now also go across to Dilip Bhatt, whom we have with us from Prabhudas Lilladher. Dilip Bhatt, there's also a question after the after the IPO opened for anchor investors day before yesterday. We talked about anchor investors. So what sign does that also give us for this IPO? We already mentioned it, but what's your take? What's your signal that you're getting from the anchor investors share being subscribed?
Good afternoon. I think Devin has summarized it quite well on an overall basis. But surely I think that the way the anchor investors have lapped it up, the demand that has come from the anchor investors, that itself suggests that the appetite is very good. And the marquee names that have come in the anchor investor list, that also is very heartening. Without any doubt, I think the greatest tailwind in favor of the stock is the valuation. And if one were to compare on a like-to-like basis with SBI Life, which is also a PSU and LIC is also a PSU, it is still available at almost 40 to 50% discount to what SBI Life is quoting at. Maybe if one were to compare to HDFC Life, it is available at something like 25-30% of what HDFC Life is quoting at. But of course, that's in the private sector. So all in all, I think LIC valuations are very favorably loaded in favor of the investors. And I think that itself can act as a big tailwind. So I think certainly it makes a very strong case for one to invest in LIC from medium term to long term perspective. Not to forget one thing, that the way LIC has trimmed its overall IPO offerings, we can expect sooner than later further offerings from LIC to continue. So in that sense, the supply of this paper will continue in the medium to longer term basis, and that possibly can act as an overhang. But surely from the current levels on a risk return basis, the way the valuations have been given, the downside appears to be very limited, and it is heavily loaded in favor of making money on in this particular IPO.
Just picking up on that, while majority of the focus seems to be on the attractive valuation of the price, there are many questions regarding undervaluation and the timing of this IPO. But Devin Choksi, I just want to ask you, what do you think is the expected demand? It's subscribed over 14% till noon. Where do you see it going over the next few days?
Well, I have no doubt in my mind that the issue will get fully subscribed. As I was making a point that I think anchor investors have invested. The rest of the investors are yet to invest, and I think this is where we are likely to see the larger part of the IPO getting subscribed in next 2-3 days' time. Also, don't forget, I think, the power of retail. Here, the policyholders of LIC are also being entitled to apply for the IPO. And in last few months, I think if you see the number of accounts which have been opened in the depositories, I would rather like to believe that I think these accounts have been opened for inviting the policyholders of LIC to become the investors, I think, in the LIC IPO. And
right.
That's where I believe that I think the retail portion of IPO also is likely to get subscribed fully. The institution segment of players, I think, are also likely to, I think, add into further subscription from what they have added into the anchor book. I think because largely that particular subscription would be available to them, even post-listing gains also. So in my viewpoint, I think IPO will get subscribed, how much margin it will get subscribed, etc. I think the numbers will tell at some point of time. But I think this is more convincing at this point of time. The point which I think one should be...
Right, Dilip Bhatt, at one end of the poll, there are investors, small as well as institutional, who are salivating at the prospect of acquiring these shares at like a deep discount. At the other end, LIC's employees, as well as those who care about the integrity of India's biggest and pioneering insurance company, actually among the biggest in the world, argue that this may be a scam. What are your thoughts on such claims?
No, I don't think that one should look upon the jewel of India in that sense. I think that is, that in my opinion, such a strong negative opinion might have been in a very microscopic minority who might be subscribing to that view. Our opinion is, by and large, I think we have to see that how this institution has grown. Not to say that there are not going to be any shortcomings. There's bound to be shortcomings in any such big institutions. But I think I would not focus more on that. I would still focus more on the AUMs, the way they have grown, and the way, the embedded value that this company has. It's almost anywhere between 5 to 6 lakh crores, which is almost 10 times more or 12 times more than any nearest one. So I think all those things really add up to this particular aura and the premium to this particular issue. And I would not focus on the negative part at the moment. At the same time, I will not ignore it. But on the pluses and the minuses, I think the pluses far outweigh the negatives. And that is how I would like to see. So I would still prefer to feel that it makes a very strong case for investing in LIC IPO. And I think surely it will meet with a good overwhelming response is what my understanding is of the entire situation.
Right. Thank you so much for your insight on that.